As members of Parliament mark the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, we'll be remembering two of our long-ago colleagues who served their constituents and their nation. One was George Harold Baker, who won the Brome riding, now Brome-Missisquoi, in the 1911 election, carrying on the family's political tradition. His father, George Barnard Baker, was first elected as a member of Canada's Parliament in the general election of 1870. While a sitting MP, George Baker fought in World War I as a lieutenant colonel commanding the 5th Canadian Mounted Rifles. He was killed in action at Ypres, West Flanders, Belgium, on June 2, 1916, during the Battle of Mount Sorel. Baker was carried out of the action by his second-in-command, Dennis Draper, and buried at the Paparinge New Military Cemetery. His gravestone bears the inscription, "Death is a low mist, which cannot blot the brightness it may veil." Until now, George Baker's been honored as the only sitting member of our Parliament to have lost his life in service to Canada. Every day in the foyer, just outside the House of Commons, MPs walk past a statue of George Harold Baker. But there was another member of Parliament who died in the Great War. His name was Samuel Simpson Sharp. He was elected to the House of Commons in the 1908 general election for the riding of Ontario North, along with his brother, William Henry Sharp, who won in 1908 to represent the Lisgar riding in Manitoba. After the 1911 election, Prime Minister Robert Borden considered Sam Sharp for cabinet as Minister of Militia and Defence, but ultimately Borden decided on Sam Hughes. As it turned out, Sharp and Hughes clashed in Parliament over military policy. On the outbreak of the First World War, Sharp was initially passed over for a command position and wasn't part of the 1st Canadian contingent for the expeditionary force that deployed overseas in 1914. Sharp considered his past conflict with Minister Hughes as the reason he was overlooked and expressed concern that this would affect his reputation. But in November 1915, Sharp was authorized by Hughes to raise a battalion from Ontario County. Sharp's battalion arrived in England in the summer of 1916, and following training was deployed to the front in France in February 1917. Sharp commanded his men in action, beginning with the Battle of Vimy Ridge in April 1917. Subsequent actions included an attack on Avion in preparation for the famous Battle of Hill 70 and the Battle of Passchendaele. But Sharp began to struggle with the impact of his military service. In October 1917, he wrote, "It's awful to contemplate the misery and suffering in this old world, and were I to allow myself to ponder over what I've seen and what I've suffered through the loss of the bravest and best in the world, I'd soon become absolutely incapable of carrying on." And in the end, he couldn't. Suffering from what was then called nervous shock, Sam Sharp took his own life on May 25, 1918. For years, the debate has surfaced regularly that Sam Sharp should no longer be overlooked, and now he won't be. Just last Thursday, November 8, 2018, the memorial to him that will ultimately take its rightful place next to Lieutenant Colonel George Baker was unveiled in Centre Block. Because as we know too well, Canadians in uniform can be wounded in ways we can't see, in ways that make it impossible for some to recover. While it's taken 100 years to lift the stigma and honor Sam Sharp, on this, the centenary of the armistice, we'll remember and honor another young Canadian who suffered those same invisible wounds for which there was no healing. Every year since 1936, the Royal Canadian Legion has chosen a Silver Cross mother. The mother who, on behalf of all mothers who've lost children in the service of our country, lays a wreath at our National War Memorial in Ottawa on November 11th. This year, Canada's Silver Cross mother is Anita Serini of Winnipeg, whose son, Private Thomas Welsh, served in Afghanistan in 2003. Burdened with the emotional wounds from that tour of duty, Thomas took his life on May 8, 2004. This morning, our nation will join his mother in honoring him. So it is. Today we remember a time 100 years ago and all those who served. They're all gone now. But lest we forget isn't just for remembrance. It's a reminder.